try got Penrith out of jail. Alexander broke from the scrum base. He gave it to fullback Robards. It went on to the speedy Ben Gonzalez, and he was in the corner to score. And Penrith eventually winning by 26 points to 18.
Over 15,000 fans flocked to Redfern when new coach George Piggin.
Over at Lidcombe Oval in a real turn-up. Early in the match, Canterbury and West were locked at 2-2. But midway through the first half, the West backline struck with quick hands, getting the ball out to Rod Petherbridge. Now, he kicked over the top, and both Potter and Langmack missed the bouncing ball, but Brett Clark didn't, and he scored for the Maggies. Canterbury were trailing 8-2 until late in the game when halfback Hagan saved the Premiers from embarrassment to score under the posts. That plus the conversion to level the scores 8-all in the shock result of the round.
There was a good crowd on hand at Lidcombe Oval, hoping to see the Magpies continue their great form from Wednesday night. And after 8 minutes, they weren't disappointed when Wilfred Williams starts a raid, culminating in Ian Schubert scoring. 7 minutes later, Brett Clark puts up the bomb, and big Rod Petherbridge comes down with it. 15 minutes before the break, the Raiders hit back when the ball goes out wide for Terry Fay. Right on half-time, Ian Naden swoops on a loose ball to send Michael Neal over. So at the break, the Magpies are looking good at 14-6. In a trailer second half, both teams had their opportunities, with West looking the better. But the only points came from this penalty goal from Ian Schubert, giving the Magpies a well-deserved 16-6 victory.
North 13 and the Magpies 30, Manly 20.
At Lidcombe Oval, the Magpies struck first at the 5-minute marker when Rod Petherbridge puts up the kick, which Ian Naden's able to gather, and he runs away to score. 17 minutes later, the Sea Eagle flaps when Des Hasler and teenage newcomer David Ronson combine to send Marty Gurr over. 4 minutes later, Manly post their second try when Fatty Vorton throws the dummy before sending David Ronson on his way. With the help of an enthusiastic home crowd, the Magpies scored 2 more tries before half-time, taking an 18-10 lead to the break. Manly charged back in the second half when Ron Gibbs ran in 2 tries, thus tying the match up at 20-all. However, it was to be the Magpies' day, with Ian Schubert kicking 7 goals and Brett Clark scoring the final try with 15 minutes remaining. West cause an upset, defeating Manly 30 points to 20.
Now, next up, I'll be joined by my special guest, the Magpie halfback, great little player, Brett Clark. But first, a short break. Us with a launching pad for a very impressive back row of Welsh, Selby and Funnell. And they ran straight and they ran hard to create havoc in the Western Suburbs defence. Naturally, the backs lapped up the great supply of good ball they were offered, but most of these things emanate from the forwards. The loss of Bruce Clark and Wilfred Williams before the game would have been a bit of a blow to Western Suburbs. So having said all that, right at the outset, Connor showed his beautiful footwork, beating Naden with a step and sprinting 40 yards. That must have knocked your backsides in a bit.
I think that was the clincher. I mean, we'd been, at that stage, we'd been up near their 25. And they got back there with a kick and the scrum. As soon as they score, it just takes the wind out of you.
He's a magnificent athlete, that O'Connor. He's one of the most beautiful runners.
Yeah.
I don't know how other to put that, and I don't want to make it sound in weird terms. I want to come back to that little incident later on, because I think there were 2 things wrong with that. I thought there was dead set double movement. I thought there was a dead set shepherd in that, but the referee seemed to be adjacent to it. Nice bit of football from this Sheehan. Now, Sheehan's an unknown quantity around Sydney, but gee, he can run, can't he?
Yeah, he's another West junior, very good footballer. He's been sort of in President's Cup and just in the junior sides. This is his first year in grade and he's making the most of it, I think. Well,
you guys aren't frightened to push the ball around. Fallow getting the balls, it's a ball skill. Did you see him up and over the pass there?
We always rip him about that at training, actually.
He's a very clever player. Gee, he's been probably Western Suburbs' best player for about a season and a half now, you know. He's been doing it consistently well all the time, that fella.
Yeah, I think he's one of the most consistent hookers probably in Sydney.
Yeah, there's no question about that. I've been mentioning his name now longer than anyone else. Beautiful little grubber kick for Slippery Morris to come in and score the try. I thought St George pack played particularly well because perhaps of the cooler weather. They've been a big pack and a lot of big men get let down badly in the summer. That seems to sap the energy. O'Connor and Johnson were a great centre pair for St George on the day. Haddock and Lane quickened service to the backs, made the back line look a lot better. Lane was popping very long passes all day long. 2 of them led to tries, and one you'll see coming up a little later on. There's a beautiful pass from O'Connor. Quick hands like Johnny Brass's style of passing. Out to Selby, back into Guida, and Guida runs in a try. He's a useful little player too.
They're very good.
So 12,000 spectators out there, and they were pretty vocal. There's a nice pass from Brett Clark, getting a pass away underneath the body there to Petherbridge, who's taken out by Burgess, and the penalty awarded, quite rightly. Petherbridge's progress stopped after he'd kicked the ball, and the referee being told. Now, a long pass from Lane. Watch this one. Straight to Kinsella. That's a beautiful pass, about the length of a cricket pitch, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a very good pass, that. He's pretty good with those, Steve. He does it consistently, like every week.
He certainly does. I mean, Kinsella, curiously, has been dropped as a result of that game, or a result of the Panasonic Cup game in midweek. I would have thought perhaps that try and his positional play in that game might have held him on there. The loss of Brett Gale early in the match was not much help either, was it?
No, once you lose a player that early, I think it tends to throw your plans off a bit.
Now, the bad news I had from his brother Scott yesterday was that he's out for the season.
Apparently, yeah, he's got to have an operation, I think, on his ankle or his knee.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Now, Petherbridge at fullback, does anyone... how do I put this? I think he sidesteps too much. He slows himself down. Has anyone ever spoken to him about that, do you know?
Not that I know of. It's just the way Rod plays. He's played the same.
But sometimes he sidesteps. That's the first thing he thinks of doing instead of just running sometimes.
Yeah.
And he stretched out beautifully and scored a try yesterday, which we're going to see in a minute. But sometimes he just seems to want to sidestep. It's on his mind all the time.
Yeah.
OK, you're not the man to discuss that with. I'll discuss that with him one of these days. Let's move on to the game from yesterday. And I thought this was... no, we're not. We've got a few separate incidents first. Let's go through them from that game. I told you I would show you an incident involving a try to Perry Haddock. Now, here's the incident. Now, here's a Shepherd to start with, as Guida runs straight into the back of Burgess. If that doesn't impede the defence, I'm a bad judge. Now, the criteria on a tackle, if a player is held in such a fashion that his forward progress is stopped, or the hand or arm holding the ball come in contact with the ground, a tackle has been performed. Both of those criteria were met there, and he's still allowed a try underneath the post. And that is, in my view, a bad decision. Continuing on, I want to show you a good bit of play by Western Suburbs, indicating, as we did in the first run of it, Sheehan's great form and the pace that he's got. The ability of this side this year, even though they're relatively lowly positioned at this stage, to still free the ball and keep the play moving so that the spectators are entertained as well as getting a good game of rugby league out of it. That was a nice move. And here's a nice little bit in the second half, which you'll see this young fella involved in up to his boot tops. Now, Schubert starts it by flicking to Clark. Clark gets it away to Cogger. Cogger goes wide, gets it to Sheehan. Sheehan comes back on the inside nicely, back into Clark, out to Cogger. And here's a bit of bad luck because it comes to Rawlings, and then Young is able to knock the pass down, and it was a good decision by the referee because it came off a Western Suburbs player back into Naden's feet, and he was in an offside position when he touched it. So that was sad. But it was
just
nice,
a bit of bad luck that I think.
Just one of those things that can happen, but a good bit of play. And the near try to funnel. Now, he didn't rule on a touch on a double movement before, and yet this one is less exaggerated than the Haddock one, in my view. Now, Funnel's the man pounding his way forward. Patently comes down very short, the arm goes out surreptitiously, but that wasn't as obvious as the Haddock one.
No, I thought he might have held the ball in the air, actually, when he on his way down.
Could be. OK, we'll move on to that other game, Western Suburbs and Balmain, from yesterday, because I thought, incidentally, there was a bigger crowd out there than they published. I don't know whether there's one gate for... well, I won't say that. That's a terrible thing to say. West performed the greatest comeback I've written since Lazarus was returned from the dead to run out 17 to 14 winners and beat a bewildered Balmain team who threw away a half-time lead of 10-0. Now, West were totally outplayed in the first half, no doubt about that. They couldn't move through the very rigid Tigers' defence, and yet in an astonishing 17 minutes of the second half, they experienced 3 tries and 2 goals. The final from this young fella. Tell us about the game.
Well, yes, it was sort of an up-and-down game, really. In the first half, their Balmain were just too strong in all departments. Their backing up was really good. Their defence was superb. We just could not break them at all. That's when I expected you to do some of your dodging and weaving, but you'd have this knock early. Yeah, I got a knock early in the game. It just knocked me around. Plus, it was very hot out there in the first half. Yeah. The second half, it seemed to cool down. Don't tell me you little blokes feel the heat, do you? Oh, in really? black jerseys, we do. I wish we had white jerseys, actually. No, you can't do that. You're traditionally Western Suburbs of the Magpies, and that's the way it's going to be.
Unless you go for white with a little bit of black.
Yeah, a little bit of black wouldn't hurt, I suppose.
Cogger instituted a nice bit of football here. You got a good combination with him?
Yeah, very good combination with Trevor. I don't mind, who plays 5'8", really. I could have a combination with anyone, as long as I've got someone outside that's, willing to feed the backs and have a run every now and again.
This bloke, I'd like to have a bucket of what he's on. I don't know whether it's hard drugs or soft drugs or no drugs or what it is, but I'd like a gross of it because it's made a new man of him. Every time a kangaroo year comes around, Ian Schubert plays like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah, I think he likes the trips to England, that's all.
That's what it is, the free trips to England.
That's what I think he likes.
He's playing extraordinarily good football for the last month. Although goal kicking wasn't his go yesterday, was it?
No, actually Colin kicked just as bad too. He kicked 1 from 7 or whatever.
That's right. Yeah, the wheel fell off badly. Was it windy out there? Very windy? The flags didn't indicate
Not that windy. I think it was just swirling around up very high. So it doesn't really get that windy at Lidcombe Oval. So.
You're becoming a television team.
Yeah, we like it actually. We haven't been on TV for 5 years. All of a sudden we've been on 4 times in 1 year. So.
Yeah, well, that was an awful tackle there. I want to just get on to Brooks in a moment because it was awful. It was really bad. There was no try on it. This fellow, Wilfred Williams, he would arguably be one of the best buys you've made, this fellow. He's incredible pace.
Very good. He's one of the quickest men I've ever seen over any distance, really.
Is that right?
Yeah. He's just got that acceleration. He'd get there at training, he'd just be jogging alongside, all of a sudden he'd just take off, and there's no way you can keep with him.
It's extraordinary. I mean, he's virtually unheralded. He came to eastern suburbs.
Yeah. And
they let him go. They apparently didn't impress them all that much. They let him go, and you guys picked him up straight away, huh?
Well, Steve went out and seen him in the Aboriginal knockout at Henson Park.
Yeah.
And he apparently had a really big game out there in one of the Titans.
How old was he?
25, I think.
Is he?
I'm not sure.
OK, well, let's have a look at a few of the incidents out of the game. That man we were talking about, Wilfred Williams. Now, watch the pace of him. There he goes. It's electrifying, isn't it? We've slowed it down so you get an idea of just what he can do. But, he's running 2 to 1, and there's Scott Gale, who's no slouch either, getting it onto you there, and plenty of backing up. But I got really shocked a couple of times, like on this occasion. He seems to be running slow. And then there's a little stutter with the feet. And then suddenly he props. He's able to change direction and start off pretty rapidly again. There he goes. He's got away from McCabe there. He runs into Wayne Pearce. Not too many get away from Wayne Pearce.
No, that's right, yeah.
But that's the sort of football this Wilfred Williams is. I've been a little bit shocked by the pace of the guy this year. Hardwick's run, it's worthwhile seeing. Just again, maybe you can talk to the people that missed the tackles here and tell them about it.
I was one of them, actually.
You were one of them,
yeah.
There you are. No, you're not. That wasn't you. The next one.
Yeah.
Yes, he gave everybody a clean workout there, didn't he?
Yeah, he runs so low to the ground. He's a very hard man to tackle.
The astonishing thing is, even though Freeman's got his hands on him, he's gone about another 18 yards sideways and backwards and pops a one-handed pass. That's where we cut out on the coverage. And I had a great lot of difficulty yesterday in that grandstand yesterday with one pier. OK, and it got directly in line with this, and I didn't see this until I had a look at the tapes this morning, and I'm just wondering whether Conlon popping the pass back into Gary Jack the last minute and a half of the game, and lo and behold, Jack drops the ball. I'm just astonished at that. I think there was a try probably going to come under the post, if not from him, from the player on his right. And I don't think I've ever seen him drop the ball in that circumstance.
No, he's got very safe hands.
He's a splendid player as a rule, and just to come up, that would have been the ball game too.
Yes.
So that's the story there. Now, just getting on to that matter I was going to say with David Brooks, I don't believe he's a prop forward. I think he's quite definitely a second-row forward, and I think that's one of the reasons why Balmain have got problems around the ruck area. Now, I think questions must be asked about Balmain. They've squandered winning positions on 3 occasions this year. Now, I don't doubt the courage of the Balmain players, but I'm very much starting to doubt severely their mental attitude and their enthusiasm. I believe several of their big names should be introduced to the reserve-grade coach fairly well. Illawarra lost 28-8 against Cronulla the match before, and then they turned around and defeated Western Suburbs 34-8 last Sunday at home. No wonder they have random drug tests. Illawarra scored from the first scrum of the match, and they were never, ever in danger. And there's some damn good football by the Illawarra side here as Hetherington shows his pace, gets it out to McIndoe, who comes up with a try late in the game. Back inside to Kissel, the little 5'8", who's a good little player. The Steelers props, Smith and Worthington, were the 2 major players on the day. They scored, Worthington scored a couple of tries, and he was with Smith quite definitely the architect of the win. Wilfred Williams shows a clean pair of heels up the sideline there, gets a pass away to Duval, and Duval goes in for the try out wide. But that was the last time that West made any noise in this game. Look at this soft try on the blind side, and look at the awful bit of defence here by number 10 for Western Suburbs, John Bill Bilger. He just stood there watching as Worthington went over. Son, you've got to get involved. You can't just stand there and let your little halfback do the tackling for you in those situations. Absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, it was all Illawarra. There's Worthington going in for another very soft try from dummy half. No wonder the Magpie nearly died. I think he was just about to cark it there. Yes, that's it. He's had the swan song. And Lee Crooks couldn't get his kick cleared. The knock came in and just upset him, and Jeff Hardy was able to get it and go straight over. That kick came straight to him. Some good quick passing out along the line here with Kissel getting it away to Worthington. He couldn't do anything wrong in this match. Everything he did turned to gold. It went out there to Hardy and then out to the Hetherington, the centre, and he was able to go over and score. McIndoe threw 3 or 4 tackles. Look at that. That was his 7th try of the year. Well, absolutely run ragged were Western Suburbs. The Steelers' backs, Kissel, Mackie, Hardy, McIndoe, Kelly and Larder. But the big rap, of course, goes to the 2 props, Smith and Worthington. Reasons. OK, West's inability to utilise a strong southerly breeze, I'm referring to the Panasonic Cup, in the first 2 quarters of their clash with Eastern Suburbs cost them a place in this year's competition. They led only 8-6 at the half-time break, and they'd been guilty of allowing too much play in their own territory when a strong tactical game had them back at 8-0. McGahn hit back with a break, which you're going to see right now from dummy half of the match. The lowly field goal again coming into calculations. Now, I've got to say something about this particular incident with Petherbridge. This is one of the worst bombings of a try I've seen in a donkey's age. Petherbridge had 3 Western Suburbs players to pass to, not a solitary player in front of him, and he passed to the only Eastern Suburbs player that was within a bull's roar. Have a look at it again from the headshot, and I think he must have had a brain explosion. I can't imagine why he would butcher a try like that. It's just astonishing to me, and it just goes to prove you can't put old heads on young shoulders sometimes. There was a certain 6-pointer there at the end of that, and he bombed it, and they've lost by a fairly close score of 16-8, and it's just one of those terrible things that happens. Ian Schubert's been showing some flashes of 82 kangaroo form. He does it every time there's a kangaroo year. This long run of his is only one of many long runs he's had over the few weeks. He seems to have actually increased his pace over the last while, and that was a nice Worth tackle. I told you about his tackling. Now look carefully at this incident. It's the McGahn try from the bomb. Melrose kicks the ball just about on the line, and McGahn is a yard, and the ball just jogged out of his hands. So that's some of the action from last week, and that was the Panasonic Cup, 16-8 to the Eastern Suburbs side. We're going to...
And at Lidcombe Oval, the first half belonged to the Magpies. Eden Naden scored the first of the 3 Western Suburbs tries in the first half as they took the Cronulla Sharks by storm. Ellison Sheehan added the others as Jack Gibson was left to ponder, the Sharks flagging fortunes in 86 as West bounced to an 18-2 lead. But Craig Diamond brought some respectability to the Sharks scoreline just before half-time, crossing for a late try to make it 18-8 to the Magpies. However, their comeback was to be short-lived as the Magpies secured their 4th win of the season with a well-deserved 35-18 victory.
The premiership table now has Manly and Souths joint leaders on 18, Parramatta 16, Canterbury 15.
The Roosters went west to Orana Park, Campbelltown for the clash with the Magpies, and it was the Magpies who drew first blood. English import Lee Crooks posted the first 4-pointer. But East Replay came soon after to go to a 6-4 lead when skipper Hugh McGahn went over for the Roosters' first try. Ian Naden scored the Magpies' second, and they were back in the lead by 10 points to 6. But just before half-time, Dave Brown did the early lead-up work for Robert Simpkins, and the Roosters led the seesawing first half by 14 points to 10. But the battling West were not about to lie down despite the half-time deficit and came back through Brett Clark to regain the lead by 16-14, which in the end proved enough to secure the 2 premiership points.
And so the premiership table tonight has a new look about it.
Penrith's backline ran right at the foothill of the mountains with Brad Izzard having a great game. Here he goes in for one of the Panthers' 5 first-half tries. The match was virtually all over by half-time with Penrith leading 18 points to 2 as Clements goes over. The Panthers' tremendous territorial advantage continued in the second half thanks to poor defence around the rucks, exploited by Alexander and co. Tempers flared, though, in the second half, with 2 players being sin-binned for 10 minutes after this all-in brawl. They were Penrith's Brandon Lee and West Lee Crooks. West's Jeff Dillon was sent from the field later in the half. When West's Trevor Cogger scored his try, the horse had already bolted.
Seaford Oval, the Magpies went in after 6 minutes when Rod Pethiebridge made a 40-metre break before unloading to Lee Crooks, who promptly spilled it. But Wilfred Williams regathered for the 4-pointer. Shortly after, though, the paper-thin Western Suburbs defence opened right up. Mal Meninga, who many thought was unlucky not to go to New Zealand, had a big game with the boot and in attack. 7 different Raiders touched down in the match, and at the final whistle, it was a slaughter, 38-6.
Penrith's backline ran riot at the foothill of the mountains with Brad Izzard having a great game. Here he goes in for one of the Panthers' 5 first-half tries. The match was virtually all over by half-time, with Penrith leading 18 points to 2 as Clements goes over. The Panthers' tremendous territorial advantage continued in the second half thanks to poor defence around the rucks, exploited by Alexander and co. Tempers flared, though, in the second half, with 2 players being sin-binned for 10 minutes after this all-in brawl. They were Penrith's Brandon Lee and West's Lee Crooks. West's Jeff Gillen was sent from the field later in the half. When West's Trevor Cogger scored his try, the horse had already bolted.
Traditionally, Parramatta have had problems at Lidcombe Oval, and today was no exception. At the 22-minute mark, the ball found Lee Crooks roaming out wide before unloading for Des Drummond. It was only 10 minutes later when the Eels struck back through prolific try scorer Brett Kenny, and again just before half-time when Peter Wynn crossed, giving Parramatta a 14-4 advantage at the break. The Magpies didn't have much to crow about until 5 minutes into the second half when Crooks, Naden and Clark combined for Trevor Cogger. Then West hit the lead 16-14 after the Eels failed to clean up a loose ball, and Brett Clark was rewarded with the try. Then heartbreakingly for Wests, a soft try from Sterling midway through the second half was enough for Parramatta to rejoin the winners' circle with a thrilling 22-16 victory.
Western Suburbs 22, Manly 20.
West opened the scoring after only 4 minutes from this high kick by Craig Neal. Trevor Cogger plucked the ball out of the hands of Marty Gurr, and West led 6-0. 11 minutes into the match and the old rivalry between both clubs flared again, following that tackle by Lee Crooks on Chris Close, who thought it was too high. The flare-up started with players exchanging blows before Crooks and Cliff Lyons each received 10 minutes to cool off. After 19 minutes, West fullback Rod Pethiebridge hit the back line at full speed to outpace the Manly defence, with a tired Noel Cleal in pursuit. And with Pethiebridge's try, the Magpies now led 12 points to 2. 5 minutes before half-time, prop Gary Webster pushed off some shabby defence before finding John Elias, who made Marty Gurr look very ordinary before scoring yet another West try. The Magpies now led 18 points to 2. Everyone expected a Manly revival in the second half, and it came 6 minutes in when Phil Daly stood in the tackle before unloading for Mal Cochrane to score. But the try that ultimately sealed it for West came when Pethiebridge, West's best player, made the extra man before English winger Des Drummond stood up his opposite Stuart Davis and then took off for the corner with the Seagulls in pursuit. Drummond's pace was too much, and West now led 22-8. After 17 minutes, Manly came back when Chris Close stood in the tackle to put Marty Gurr across in a handy position, and West were now leading 22 points to 14. 33 minutes in, and Phil Blake made no mistake from close range when he slipped across under the post, and it was now 22-20. Mal Cochrane had this chance from 30 metres out to get Manly a draw. The kick was wide, and the Magpies beat the competition leaders again.
Canterbury 32, Canberra 14, Saints 24, Penrith 20, and have a look at that one on the bottom of the screen. The Magpies 36, Balmain 6.
At Leichhardt Oval, Gary Jack notched up 100 first-grade games. But the Magpies had their own reason to celebrate 4 minutes later when a clever set play from Clark to Crooks put the big Englishman into the gap for Pethiebridge to score. 20 minutes later, Crooks and Clark again combined, with the halfback this time moving upfield before unloading to Paul Sheehan, who does the rest. West were leading 18-2 after Brett Clark had scored his own try, while the Tigers had to wait until just before the break for their first. West extended their 18-6 half-time lead when Michael Neal cut through some ordinary defence, giving Rod Pethiebridge his second try. It was a day Balmain will want to forget, with West running in 4 second-half tries, completing a resounding 36 points to 6 upset victory.
At Lidcombe Oval, Western Suburbs overran Illawarra 26-12, but the first try didn't come until the 39th minute when Brett Clark backed up.
At Ronson Field, the Magpies' chances of winning 3 on the trot took an early setback when Mark McGaw offloaded a perfect pass for his centre partner, Andrew Ettinghausen. The Magpies equalised at the 30-minute mark when Ian Schubert lofted a long pass for Paul Sheehan, who turned it back inside for Michael Neal to score. However, the Hungry Sharks went to the break leading 10-6 after Michael Speechley followed through a well-judged kick from Phil Hurst. Cronulla pressed home their advantage in the second half, scoring 3 tries to 1 for a convincing 26-12 victory, dashing Lee Crooks's hopes of leaving the Magpies in a blaze of glory before heading home to England next week.
Despite West's farewell to Lidcombe Oval was a sad one for the Magpies fans, with their side going down to East in a trialless match. Wayne Portlock booted 3 goals and a field goal for the Roosters' win. Even though the game had no bearing on the premiership finals, it still attracted a crowd of nearly 7,500.
St George